When Andy Warhol created his New York studio in the 1960s, many saw his assembly line approach to creating visual work as a groundbreaking business model. Employing assistants to create artwork first began many centuries ago, but Warhol's production line was a way of working that involved creating work at an unprecedented scale and speed, and on a massive scale, hence his studio being named The Factory. He gave birth to a new form of artistic and creative process where the artist could call a work of art his work without playing a single part in its execution. And I've spoken about other artists before who create work with the aid of assistants, or with varying roles and degrees of influence on the finished work. And in today's world, with strong financial and commercial incentives to increase the quantity of work or provide an impossible level of perfection, hiring assistants is a necessary part of the process for many artists. However, one particular artist, Jeff Koons, one of the richest and most well-known artists alive today, really took the production line, factory-style way of working to the next level. And so in today's video, we're going to take a deeper look inside Jeff Koons' studio, his setup, his process, his equipment, and of course the somewhat tumultuous and divisive but certainly interesting relationship he has with the individuals that are ultimately behind the scenes creating his work. Jeff Koons is an American contemporary artist with his main production studio based in New York. As I said, he's one of the richest artists around today, and he holds 2 ranks for the top 5 highest prices ever paid for an artwork, specifically by a living artist. In 2013, his very famous balloon dog Orange, one of the 5 stainless steel balloon animals highlighting the inhale and exhale of human breath as a symbol for life and death, sold for $58 million. In 2019, another one of Koons' sculptures, Rabbit, a stainless steel replica of a blown-up rabbit toy, sold for $91 million, both of which were record prices at the time. And if you were curious, the number 1 spot is Flag by Jasper Johns, which sold for $110 million. Jeff is certainly quite a divisive figure in the art world. He definitely has his fair share of critics and online haters, and I could make a whole video about his corporate business type approach to making art and the certainly questionable level of value given to his work and himself as an artist. Koons himself often walking around in a Wall Street type business suit. Instead, I really want to try and encourage people to move your attention away from that and towards the intimate, the handmade, the skilled craftsmanship that you'll see is really required for any of these pieces to ultimately exist. Koons has operated one of the industry's largest studio practices for many years, and in the mid-1980s he established one of his first factory-like studios in Soho, New York, staffed with over 30 assistants. In the early 2000s, Koons had as many as 120 assistants in his studio, and then up until 2019 he had a 16,000 square foot studio factory with varying numbers of assistants depending on the financial stability and status of the business. Alongside a large portfolio of sculptures, of which Koons is most well known for, he'll often manufacture a number of paintings alongside the sculptures, such as his large series of still life images in the body of work titled Celebration, to saturated photo compositions, to abstract work, to replicas of famous paintings from the past. Whilst it does seem like Koons' studio has produced a large number of paintings, the finished output is actually quite low. Compared to Andy Warhol's factory, for example, which produced some 10,000 works over his lifetime, meaning a steady flow of about 200 paintings coming up for auction every year. Koons has produced around 172 paintings, give or take a few based on my own counting on his website, mostly produced between 1995 and 2017, which is about 7 to 8 paintings a year. So you can see there's quite a significant difference. Now, obviously Warhol's work is a lot of quite simple screen printed images, but even with the size and the detail and sometimes photorealistic rendering of Koons' paintings, I was definitely surprised and quite curious as to why so few paintings are actually finished. I assume this is partly because they produce many more sculptures than paintings. Koons' primary output is sculpture, but according to a number of articles, the paintings they do produce can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months to complete. And as someone who has done a lot of painting myself, including photorealistic painting, it seems like an absurdly long time, particularly for a team. So I wanted to try and dig a bit deeper and see what these people are actually being tasked to do. So part of the reason for this slow output is that Koons frequently stands in the public eye, and each of his pieces faces immense scrutiny, making his attention to detail and desire for perfection extremely important to the success of his work. So as a result of this, Koons requires an unusually tedious and maybe unnecessarily elaborate painting process, where the first stage involves Koons creating the collage of the artwork on a computer, and then the crew transfer the artwork onto the canvas using carbon paper, and then they begin the extensive process of color matching. watching. And you can see here the printed out digital version of a piece called Triple Popeye. The printed out versions are color matched by hand, which means that the assistant will mix paints to match a very small and specific area on the hand, for example, and then they'll make a larger sample of that paint mix, label it appropriately, and then map it onto the reference photo like you can see here. All of those small markings are different colors, and in this case there are 141 colors just for this portion of the hand. And you can see this slightly fuzzy photo on a different piece, 30 or 40 different colors just for this one tiny spot in the painting, which is pretty crazy. Mixing paints to match a printed digital reference image is very common practice among artists. I've talked about this before in other videos, but certainly not at this level of detail. So this is clearly a big contributing factor in the lengthy amount of time it takes to finish some of these pieces. Another factor is that no matter how large the image, his assistants use tiny brushes, as Koons attested in an interview. Each of these broad sweeps is hand painted with very small brushes. We never use sponges or anything larger. And so the reason that the assistants have to use such small brushes is because Koons is always looking for an extremely smooth finish to the work, which is all a bit ironic, particularly when they're recreating large Photoshop brush marks and scribbles that have obviously been almost thrown into the composition by Koons. One of the assistants said, "We have to watch out that people aren't painting too thick. It's kind of an irreversible thing." And so they have to use a very small brush, or at least a very small amount of paint, to achieve this heightened, almost artificial level of perfection, almost like it's been performed by a large scale printer. Koons focuses on delivering a message through design concepts. I'm in awe and wonder of what the idea is and what that will be like. I'm excited by it. I just want them to feel that. Since the outcome of the piece matters most, it needs to achieve the degree of perfection Koons envisions to succeed in his mind. Eventually, the studio started to heavily systemize the mixing and application of paint so that, by the end of it, all of the assistants' hands were one in a sense, and so there were no differences in color or application from one assistant to the other. Depending on the painting, an even more comprehensive process was required beyond what I've already mentioned. For the very large collection of gazing ball paintings, where the studio perfectly replicated around 50 classical paintings, the team would first separate the original painting into its composite colours in Photoshop, and then make a stencil shape of that particular colour so that the painting's initial layers on the canvas were perfectly positioned relative to the original reference. Each small area of that process on the canvas had around 250 to 300 colours, with the average painting having 7,000 colours in total, most of which have to be pre-mixed and carefully laid out, as you can see here. But that's only the first stage. After all of the main colour areas have been applied, then the hyper-detailed brushwork is required to actually recreate all of the small details and textures of the original classical paintings. The artist will have the reference printed out in full scale and kind of flip it back and forth over the painting area to ensure that they're producing a pixel-perfect recreation of the original classical painting. One of the interesting aspects about the studio setup that you might have noticed in a few of these images are these large custom-built wooden platforms that some of the assistants use to access different parts of the canvas, some with chairs positioned in quite precarious positions. I'm not entirely sure how comfortable those positions would be for long painting sessions, but I do quite like the way they've designed them to provide multiple people access to the canvas at the same time, and then there are different levels depending on the piece that they're working on, and of course the structures double as storage locations for equipment and materials that are probably used on a regular basis. So definitely quite a cool bit of equipment, definitely something I haven't seen in other creative spaces before. The production of Jeff's sculptures is also interesting to examine. The process for creating Pink Ballerina, an 8-foot tall marble replica of a small $150 porcelain ballerina his grandmother had, also required an enormous amount of time and labour to finish, requiring 33,000 hours just for the handwork and polishing, according to the head of Koons' hand finishing department, Ayama Ayoma. Not to mention the thousands of hours required to scan the model and translate those details into instructions for machines to carve the actual sculpture. His famous balloon dog sculpture wasn't manufactured in Koons' New York studio, but actually by a company called Carlson & Co. in San Fernando, California, one of the world's leading specialist fabricators at the time. Since the piece was made many years ago, between 1994 and 2000, in order to turn the small original balloon model into a large sculpture, the company actually had to use old-fashioned measurement techniques dating back to the age of Greek and Roman times. Part of the challenge was creating a smooth contour for sculptures like Balloon Dog, in which 60 parts were welded to produce the round limbs and torso. What makes it so tricky is that these are very simple shapes and suggestive, Mr. Suman said. So if the form doesn't look 100% perfect, the defects really stand out. The company also had to figure out how to achieve this mirror polish finish in bright colours like magenta and blue. Carlson's experts will not give away their secret, except to say that it's a multi-stage process involving the application of certain adhesives before an automobile type paint goes on. And so to conclude this video, the irony of Jeff Koons' work is that he places such importance and value on the idea, the communication of meaning to the viewer, yet his work, as we've seen, is a celebration of process, right? The complex, ingenious, world-class metallurgy and welding and sculpture that comprises the $60 million balloon dog is a testament to the incredible process of human craftsmanship and artistry. However, according to Koons, one part of grasping one of his pieces is to understand what he is trying to accomplish on a conceptual level. Koons does not place as much emphasis on the process as on the discovery of higher states of beauty or the bringing together of polarities through his work. And of course, yes, I actually agree that Koons' work really can be a discovery of higher states of beauty, but not because of the conceptual meaning, which can at times be interesting and fun to engage with for sure, but because of the very fact that those sculptures and paintings were crafted into existence through thousands of hours of work and creative effort. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found something interesting or enjoyable. For me, I find this stuff fascinating, right? I love behind the scenes and really just seeing how things are done, how things are made. I have such a deep fascination with understanding the inner workings of things, particularly creative work, and hopefully you guys can resonate with that and are equally interested in this as I am. But if you enjoyed, consider dropping this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more artistic and creative behind the scenes type videos, looking at all kinds of creative work, not just fine artists, but designers, prop makers, visual effects, all kinds of stuff. I've got a lot of really cool videos planned for the future, but until then, thanks for watching.